Hello. So in this video, we're going to be talking about reflection as a component of portfolio writing. Now, there is going to be a companion video to this that will go up either next week or in a couple of weeks about teaching reflective writing as part of the portfolio process. But for this video, I'm more interested in what you as a student or a writer of a writing portfolio can do to strengthen that reflective component. Now, because in this series, I've talked about, and in their book, Portfolio Teaching, Nadra Reynolds and Rich Rice talk about how important reflection is as a key component of the portfolio approach. That's one of the major reasons to do a portfolio as such, is because it brings together all of the work that you've done and gives it a kind of coherence. Whereas if you are, for instance, in a class where you're just writing discrete projects, so first you write a research, or first you write a rhetorical evaluation, then you write a research argument, then you write a personal narrative or whatever it is, and these are each standalone projects. Yes, you may have a reflective component in that, but it's not as intuitive or as necessary to look at the entire body of work you've produced for that class. Or this, the same thing applies here with like creative writing or artistic portfolios. You look at the entire body of work you've produced, you can gain a different kind of insight. The same thing applies with teaching portfolios. If you look at all of the stuff that you've produced, you can gain a different kind of insight than if you're just looking at individual pieces. So what is reflection about? Well, reflection is a type of critical interrogation of your own work, your own process, your own experience, your own development as a writer. Now that sounds like a lot, and it is. There's a number of different, and typically you will not do all of these things. Often that's just, it's too much and it's not necessarily productive to try and do that much reflective work. What you should be doing, though, is periodically engaging in reflection. So you want to develop what Reynolds and Rice call the reflective learning habit. So the reflective learning habit, that is getting into a mental space where you are regularly thinking about your writing and you're regularly thinking about your writing process. So there's a couple of major things you want to be doing here. One is producing reflective documents. So things like, I have my students do cover letters for their projects. I'll talk more about this in the teaching reflection video. One of the things that the that the cover letter has students reflect on is, what rhetorical choices did you make for your specific audience and purpose? So those sorts of concrete, specific things are really good ways to start doing reflection. And it can be something like that. What did I do and why? It can also be things like, what's one skill that I developed in this paper? What one thing that I learned? One thing I'm now able to do that I wasn't able to do before? It could be a question like, how does this project demonstrate growth from this earlier project? So you can look at multiple pieces and show comparative relationships. You can also think about this in terms of identifying problems or limitations. What didn't work about this project? What could I do better, and how might I approach that differently in future projects? You could think about that both in terms of, if this is a portfolio where you get to revise things, like I've taught in portfolio classes where students produced documents initially, and then at the end of the semester, we spent like 2 weeks or whatever it was doing revision strategies, and the students turned in a final draft of things. If that's what you're doing, if you have the opportunity to revise this, you can think about reflection in terms of what isn't working and what can I do to strengthen it. And actually, Reynolds and Rich do say in here, revision is tied to the reflective process. Cultivating the reflective learning habit then should make students more willing to reread and rethink and to add, delete, or move material around. So that's definitely a big benefit of reflection, is it can help you think about what can be done better in revision. How can I strengthen this paper or this poem or story or these teaching materials or whatever it is? What can I do to improve this specific document? But this can also be on a sort of broader level. Okay, I reckon this maybe especially is more useful when you aren't revising, when it's just, here's the essay, but I'm looking to move forward as a writer. Okay, this paper struggled to do X thing. In the future, I can do Y strategy to try and solve that problem. I can try and improve my future writing by looking back at what I struggled with in the past. So this is, again, one of those benefits of reflection, is you start to identify patterns in your previous work and start figuring out what those mean and how you can use that knowledge going forward. So there are different types of portfolios, as we've talked about a couple of different times in this series. And Reynolds and Rich give us some different sets of reflective questions for a best works portfolio or for a process portfolio. So again, as a refresher, a best works portfolio basically does what it says on the tin. You would be choosing your best, strongest works, whether that's essays, whether that's creative writing pieces, teaching materials, whatever it is. What are the best things that you have produced? And then a process portfolio is based on constructing a story. So hopefully that's, here's how I've improved or strengthened as a writer over the course of this semester. But it could also be something like, here are the things that I have learned that I do well, and the things I learned that I struggle with. What is your writing process as demonstrated by the pieces in this portfolio? So Reynolds and Rich give us two different sets of questions that you as a reflector should be thinking about with your work. So if you're doing a best works portfolio, what they recommend thinking about is these questions, or strategies that they recommend. Discuss your best entry and why it's your best. Detail the revisions you've made and the improvements and changes that you want readers to notice. Demonstrate what this portfolio illustrates about you as a writer, student, researcher, or critical thinker. Acknowledge the readers' respondents who have influenced your portfolio pieces and describe how. Reflect on what you've learned about writing, reading, or other topics of the course, and include specific examples or passages from your working folder. So basically, again, these are focused on identifying patterns, looking into the details of the work that you've done, and seeing relationships across different pieces of written work and figuring out what those relationships mean. In terms of the process portfolio, some of the questions that they recommend thinking about or strategies they recommend using. Outline the process you went through to produce one or more of your entries. Acknowledge your weaknesses, but show how you've worked to overcome them. Discuss each piece of writing you've included, touching on its strength. So again, this is about identifying these patterns and building from them. And that's the key thing with reflection, really. How you choose to approach reflection. If you're in a class and an instructor says these are the specific ways you need to approach reflection, obviously that is the direction you want to go. But if you're not in a class, if you're just doing this portfolio for your own purposes or something like that, or if an instructor doesn't give you guidance about what specific things to do as a reflector, ultimately those are the key things you want to be thinking about. What am I doing? What changes am I seeing across this work? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? How does this work demonstrate growth? What did I bring to the table, etc., etc.? And the more carefully and critically you can think about those things, particularly the more you can think about those things regularly, and again, get into that mental habit of reflecting and identifying these patterns, the more useful this reflective component is going to be, both for you as a writer/learner and for the audiences reading your portfolio.